As the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, progresses, the Department of Health and Human Services is taking away the religious freedom that all Americans are guaranteed by the First Amendment by requiring that all employers, regardless of religious conscience, provide all forms of contraception to their employees and even to minors without the knowledge of their parents. In response to this assault on the Constitution, Catholic leaders are stepping up and are searching for what can be done within the bounds of the law to deliver quality health care that follows the ethical and religious directives for Catholic health care services. The Make Straight the Pathway Conference was held in Houston, Texas in March of 2013 on the campus of the University of St. Thomas to shed light on the critical problem of providing quality health care and protecting everyone's religious freedoms.
It is my privilege and honor to serve as General Counsel at Liberty Institute, to get to work with a guy that you're probably all familiar with, Kelly Shackelford, who really for 25 years has been fighting for religious liberty rights, not only in the state of Texas, but across America. I got to join him 3 years ago in this position. And our mission at Liberty Institute has sort of changed in the last few years. We were primarily a Texas-based group, and Jonathan is going to share later about sort of the Texas effort. We've spun him off into this group called Texas Values. He will concentrate on the efforts in Texas. Liberty Institute now, we're going nationwide, and we've actually got cases throughout the country, about 40 of them. And our mission is, unashamedly, is to restore religious liberty in America. That is our focus. That's what we're battling every day in cases across the nation, defending religious liberty for our churches, in our schools, and throughout the public arena. Today, I've been tasked with, in 20 minutes, which for a litigator, I've never spoken to anybody in 20 minutes about anything. You know, we call a 75-page document a brief. And so I've been asked to talk about freedom of conscience rights, and we've got a great, they've set it up perfectly with David and Richard, so I'll try not to be repetitive, but I do want to accomplish three things in 20 minutes. I want to give just a little bit of further, kind of emphasize some of the historical underpinnings of our conscience rights. I want to give you a brief overview of where the law is today, and then I want to delve into a little bit more deep into where the current threats are. Not just in the healthcare, but in the whole area of freedom of conscience, because I think that those other areas, eventually, if we don't fight there, they are going to impact specifically freedom of conscience rights. Let me begin with a fundamental principle. Every American should be free to live and do business consistent with his or her deeply held beliefs. I think everyone at some level agrees with that fundamental principle. However, in too many situations, in case after case, we're seeing that the government is attacking and, in fact, punishing people of faith because of their constitutionally protected thoughts and beliefs. Religious liberty is our first freedom. Religious liberty, you know what David kind of went through in giving you sort of that background, but religious liberty is fundamental to every other freedom we enjoy as Americans. And I think we knew that, but we've lost that. That religious liberty, as our first freedom, serves as the basis for all other freedoms. As our first freedom, religious liberty is the fundamental component. Our founders understood that religious liberty, what we think and how we act on those beliefs, was central to, and in fact the key to, democratic political and economic freedom. Without religious liberty freedom, political and economic freedom is in jeopardy. And I'll applaud the bishops on this, because the Catholic Conference, and Richard is part of that, have done in the last year maybe a little bit over that, have done an excellent job in instructing not just the Catholic faithful, but people of all faiths on the importance of religious liberty. Because if we lose religious liberty, everything else is coming. Everything else is going. Our founders recognized all freedoms flow from religious freedom, and without the guarantee of religious freedom, all other freedoms are jeopardized. David went briefly over the First Amendment. What I often do when I speak to children in schools or even college students, I'll have a $100 bill. I work for a nonprofit. I rarely have a $100 bill anymore. I came out of 20 years of private practice, but I'll hold up my $100 bill and I'll say, for the first student who can cite me the provision of the Constitution that guarantees the separation of church and state verbatim, I'll give this $100 bill. And of course, the kids are all, they all get on their iPhones because they're looking for the text. And of course, no, it's not there. And as David did so eloquently, explaining that the protections of the First Amendment were to protect us from government, not to cause government to persecute us because of our religious beliefs. That First Amendment is the First Amendment. That's the first phrase of our Bill of Rights. Our founders understood that that's our first liberty because it is so essential and so key to our existence. Glad to see that David quoted George Washington add another quote talking about specifically freedom of conscience rights. The liberty enjoyed by the people of these states of worshiping Almighty God agreeably to their conscience is not only among the choicest of their blessings, but also of their rights. And James Madison, the author of the First Amendment, you remember that quote David highlighted, conscience is the most sacred of all property. And then also Madison, which in writing in 1785, which formed the basis for what became the First Amendment, the religion clause of the First Amendment said, the equal right of every citizen to the free exercises of his religion according to the dictates of conscience. The founders understood that the free exercise of religion wasn't just believing, it was exercising that beliefs. And when the administration and the former Secretary of State now says that they're protecting freedom of worship, be confident that they know exactly the words they're using. They're changing the meaning of the First Amendment that guarantees free exercise of religion and calling it this freedom of worship because, as Richard said, their objective is to get us, to keep us in our churches. We can believe what we ever want in our churches, freedom of worship in their terminology. But once we act on our faith, then that's going to be prohibited. Well, that's not what the First Amendment says. That's not what the founders understood. All right, let's just briefly spend a few minutes on what is the current law. And I'm going to be critical of a Catholic Supreme Court justice whose name's not Roberts. Is that all right with everyone? Okay, don't throw anything at me. Richard, you okay? Yeah. For the most part of our existence as Americans, as a country, we believe the free exercise was just what I said, that the government was prohibited from passing laws that restricted people of faith from exercising their religion. And it took a really, really good reason, in the legal terminology, a compelling interest, for the government to restrict our religious practice. We thought that was the law. When I went to law school in the 80s, that was the law that I learned. When Richard went to the law school in the 40s, that's what he learned. Sorry, Richard. I know, okay. In the 70s, 80s, you remember the 80s, 70s. But no, that the law was that for the government to restrict our religious beliefs, to restrict our religious exercise, compelling state interest, okay, in order to substantially burden. Well, that all changed in 1990 thanks to Brother Scalia. And in a case out of Oregon, Employment Division versus Smith, case involved two drug rehabilitation counselors who were members of the Native American Church. And as part of their religious ceremony, believe it or not, they smoked peyote. That was historically what they'd done. It wasn't just a bunch of kids who showed up and formed a church and decided they were going to do something. This was a long-standing tradition that they had done. They had been fired from their jobs and they were seeking unemployment benefits. And so the issue in the case was whether they could prohibit them from receiving these benefits, or did that violate their First Amendment rights? Up until 1990, the answer was that if this was really their sincerely held religious beliefs and practices, it was clearly burdening them, the state then had to come forward with a really, really good reason, then that was the standard. Justice Scalia had a different answer, and he was joined by 6 judges on the Supreme Court. So in a 6-3 decision, the law of free exercise, the law that applies to our rights of conscience, and why all these statutes that Richard went over are so important and why we need further legislative protections, is because the law changed. And what Justice Scalia said in the opinion was, if a law is generally applicable, in other words, if it doesn't target religious folks, then these free exercise principles don't apply. And so in that case, which really overturned some of the cases David talked about, the Amish cases, the Seventh-day Adventist cases, laws that are generally applicable and neutral, then you don't have free exercise rights. Now, that is extremely disturbing. A few years later, the court got another case in which the Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus the city of, and I'm not from Florida, but I think it's Hialeah, and it involved the Santeura religion, which is an African religion that does have some Catholicism elements to it. And I'm not an expert on Catholicism, but I don't believe you guys practice animal sacrifice. Just like we don't do snakes in the Baptist church, which is probably a misconception you have about us, at least in my Baptist church. But this belief system, they practice animal sacrifice. The city of Hialeah, Florida, banned this practice. And the issue in that case was whether or not that violated these folks' religious exercise rights. In a very, very divided court, the majority, written by Justice Kennedy, so this time we'll applaud a Catholic justice, holds that the city's ordinances are unconstitutional. Now, we don't get a majority of the court to change the general applicable neutral standard that Scalia established in employment versus division. Instead, what Justice Scalia does is says, look, these laws aren't neutral or generally applicable. There's no justification for them. They're targeted specifically to stop these people from engaging in their religious practice. At the Supreme Court, that's where the law is today. The law for U.S. Supreme Court on free exercise is the law is generally applicable, then your free exercise rights, well, you better show that it's not generally applicable. You better go after that it's not neutral, that it's targeted. Now, that brings, when we talk about the HHS mandate, free exercise claims, well, HHS mandate, is that generally applicable? Does it apply to everyone? Is it neutral? Now, we have some arguments that it's not generally applicable, but generally, if that's the law, we're not in real good shape. Well, then how did, as Richard mentioned, 13 of 18 cases, how did they win on 13 of them? Well, the reason is, in 1993, Congress passed, President Clinton signed, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And what the Religious Freedom Restoration Act did was restore the test prior to Smith versus Employment Division. It took what Scalia did, and Congress said, and the President signed and said, we don't like that. We're going to restore the case that the government, to substantially burden religion, to substantially burden a person's free exercise of religion, even if the rule's generally applicable, the government still has to show, or now has to show, a compelling interest, and the law has to be narrowly tailored. So that was good, right? So we get this protection under what lawyers call RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court didn't like that in a case that came out of Bernie, in San Antonio area, actually involving the Archbishop of San Antonio. The court declared RFRA unconstitutional as it applied to state and local governments, but not unconstitutional as it applies to the federal government. So where we are today is on the federal level, when the federal government takes an action, we have a Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The federal government, when it takes an action, they have to have a compelling interest in order to substantially burden religious exercise. That law has to be narrowly tailored. So the reason that there have been 13 of 18 victories is they've been under RFRA against the federal government because the Smith decision has been done away with. Unfortunately, because of the Bernie case, RFRA on the federal level does not apply to state governments and local governments. And that's why Jonathan will talk next about the protections that are needed at the state level to restore a more traditional, historic approach to religious freedom. How are we doing on time? All right. Let's delve into some specific areas in which freedom of conscience rights are currently under attack, will be under attack, and highlight some of the cases that Liberty Institute is handling and other groups. The first, because I wanted to talk about, is really it happened. We got the decision at the beginning of 2012, so this is a relatively new, and this is the encouraging part of where the Supreme Court is on free exercise and why we believe, as attorneys who litigate this every day, that there is a good consensus on the Supreme Court, a solid majority who will protect religious liberty rights. The case came out of a Lutheran school in Missouri, in which had terminated a teacher, and the issue in the case was whether or not a doctrine known as the ministerial exception, which is derived out of the First Amendment, which says that the government cannot interfere with the hiring and firing decisions of ministries, whether that applied in this case, and whether that teacher could bring a employment discrimination. So you've got the First Amendment conflicting with the employment laws. And in this case, what's remarkable, two things are remarkable. One is the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the religious ministry, the Christian school, 9-0. That this Supreme Court would agree on anything, 9-0 is tremendous. Secondly, that they would agree on protecting religious liberty and protecting religious groups is incredible. But what is perhaps the most incredible part is what the Obama administration argued in the case to the Supreme Court. They argued that the employment laws, the protections under Title VII, trumped religious liberty rights, and that religious liberty rights were just the same as the church is the same as a labor union. You've got freedom of association rights, but it's the same. We've got to weigh it, and so there's a strong national policy of protecting people from employment discrimination. So we think the religious liberty rights come second. That drew lots of questions from the justices, like, well, what about like the Catholic Church who discriminates in the hiring of priests based upon sex? Does that violate the employment laws? And of course, they say, oh, no, we don't think. But that was their argument. I mean, it had to lead to that. And Justice Scalia said, in response to the DOJ's arguments that they were extraordinary, and then Justice Kagan, the former Solicitor General for Obama, said, I too find that amazing. Now, the good is, the court rejected it 9-0. The bad is, people are arguing this. And we know where we're headed, and we know what the type of justices the current administration it wants to appoint and what positions they want to have. I want to briefly talk about pregnancy resource centers. You guys, case that we tried in Austin, or I tried in Austin last year, we're still waiting on a decision. There are cases out of Maryland, a case out of New York, where government compelling pregnancy resource centers to say outside, big and bold, guess what we don't do. Sort of be like Chick-fil-A having to post outside that they don't sell beef. Instead, they're asking pregnancy resource centers to post outside before they can ever come in and deal with them to say, we don't provide abortions, we don't provide birth control at the outset. So far, we've won each of those cases. We're waiting for the case that I tried in April, almost now a year ago. We're waiting for the court's decision. We're hopeful, but it's this idea, can the government compel us to do something that's contrary to our religious beliefs? You guys talked about the right in the case out of New Jersey with the nurse, case out of Montana about the right, or actually was argued the right to physician-assisted suicide, and if there is a constitutional right to that, that will intersect with our religious liberty rights. Do we have a right to not participate in something that someone has said is a fundamental right? Physician-assisted suicide, abortion, and of course, the one that is headed to the court with arguments we're in March, right? Later this month is if the court finds that homosexuals are a protected status and have protected rights, we're going to see more and more. I know I've been consulting with physicians in several areas who, one, do not want to service homosexual folks, and do they have a right to not, or are they going to be imposed to it? Another case that is currently at the Ninth Circuit involves pharmacists. And in a case out of Oregon, an Oregon law requires pharmacists and pharmacies to dispense abortion-inducing drugs. If they do not, then their licenses are subject to being revoked. And the state has taken the position that if you don't want to do it, just don't be a pharmacist. If it can happen to pharmacists and without the protections in law, then it's also going to happen to other healthcare providers. My prediction is it will happen to lawyers. It'll happen to others in the professions, requiring you to believe a certain way, act a certain way. If you don't believe or act their way, then you can't be in that profession. Fortunately, at the district court, the pharmacist won, but it's at the Ninth Circuit, and at the Ninth Circuit, people of faith never win, and so we'll be at the Supreme Court. Professional counselors, there are 2 cases that were recently decided involving that. That has to do, again, with the issue of same-sex and homosexuals. You've got students, and that's Julia Ward, who's a student at Eastern Michigan, and the university prohibits under their code discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation. Part of her master's program in professional counseling, was asked to counsel a homosexual client. She requested that she be able to refer them to another student because she wasn't comfortable dealing with that issue. The university, of course, they respected that decision. No, they expelled her from the program. And the Sixth Circuit reversed the district court who had ruled in favor of the university. And then after that, the case was settled, and Julia, the expulsion was removed from her record, and she got a little bit of money. The opposite occurred in Georgia. So you got Michigan, and then in Georgia, you had a student who was also seeking a master's degree in counseling. And in that case, and I love this is what they said. They wanted her to participate in a remediation plan because there were deficiencies in her ability to be a multicultural, competent counselor, particularly with regard to working with gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer questioning populations. Because of her faith, she objected to those things. I don't even know what all those are, but I don't know what queer questioning is, but maybe someone could explain it to me. She alleged violations, and she lost, and the 11th Circuit affirmed. Very, very disturbing. Photographers, this is a young lady from Elaine Photography, and she decided a homosexual couple came and wanted her to photograph private business, wanted her to photograph her commitment ceremony, their commitment ceremony. She said, I can't do that. I oppose that. And the New Mexico Human Rights Commission fined her $7,000 and ordered her to photograph. The New Mexico Court of Appeals affirmed, and the case is now on appeal to the New Mexico Supreme Court. A private photographer. If that's not enough, how about bakeries? You got a bakery and all these, of course, coming in the homosexual area. Wanting someone in New Jersey, in Oregon, and in Colorado, there are cases in which bakeries were asked to provide a wedding cake, and the bakery said for homosexual couple, and the bakery said we can't do that, and they've been in each of those states. They have state investigations against them because of that. Of course, bed and breakfast owners in Illinois, Hawaii, Vermont, and New York. Bed and breakfast owners have been prosecuted for refusing to provide rooms to same-sex couples. And then Richard went over the HHS mandate, so I really don't need to delve into that, other than to say that the HHS mandate cases are the avenue in which the intersection between the government saying we can tell you not only how you act when you go outside the four corners of your church. And that really, that is essentially it. To tell a religious ministry, we represent some Christian colleges in those cases, and to, like this university, to tell them that we hold dear to certain fundamental beliefs with regard to life, conception, death, that you have to violate that in facilitating abortion-inducing drugs, providing birth control. And now with this, and they're playing a game. Richard talked about the new proposed rules in February where they tried to, it's sort of the bait and switch. Oh, we've got new proposed rules. You don't have to pay. Well, no one knows where it's going to be paid from. Now, think about it. What they've done in the new proposed rules for religious ministries. So this is any ministry that's not a church, okay, as Richard explained, not a church. If you have 50 or more employees, you have a religious ministry, you're going to have to provide insurance, which provides for birth control and abortion-inducing drugs. If you don't do that, you're subject to major, major penalties. Major fines. And what the government has now done is said, all right, we've got a new rule. You're not going to have to provide for that. But if you tell us you're not going to provide for that, then your insurance carrier is going to have to provide it free of cost. Okay, so who's going to pay for it? So my ministry has Blue Cross and Blue Shield. We will opt out. But any employee who works for our ministry will be able to get Blue Cross and Blue Shield that provides for these things that we object. Now, first off, we're at a minimum, we're facilitating it. The second is who's going to pay? Well, I think the answer who's going to pay is everybody who has Blue Cross and Blue Shield. So all you've done is just subsidized across the board. And that's the whole thing. I mean, the background, of course, of this is it's all political, and it's the administration paying back Planned Parenthood and NARAL types for going out and supporting him big time. And it's a huge It's a huge way to circumvent the laws Richard went about the federal funding of abortions. We're not going to fund them federally. We're just going to have everybody across the country fund them. And that's exactly what's happened. My time has expired. If any of these issues come up, like I said, we're litigating these across the country. You have a question, our website's libertyinstitute.org. Go on there, email me, call me. We're more than willing to help, want to be involved. I think the key is we need to stand up. We do have a great history. We have a great historical, as David shared. We can win these cases. Again, 13 out of 18 we've won. We haven't gotten to the merits of the nonprofit cases. That's just in the for-profit cases, which are quite frankly harder cases. We can win this issue, and it is going to go to the Supreme Court. It's going to be a huge case. It's going to impact our free exercise rights, our freedom of conscience rights in the future. So please, if something comes up, please call us. But thank you all.
Hi, I'm Jeff Gardner, and on behalf of the John Paul II Life Center and the Christus Medicus Foundation, thank you for watching this presentation. The need for more crisis pregnancy centers and Christ-centered medical practices throughout the United States is critical and ongoing, and we'd like to encourage you to get involved. Before you do, there are a couple of important takeaways that we'd like to leave you with. First and foremost, develop a strong and clear vision of what it is you want to create. Be sure that you understand the distinctions between a crisis pregnancy center, a family practice clinic, an OBGYN clinic, a multidisciplinary medical practice, or a sonogram center. Familiarize yourself, too, with the not-for-profit laws as they pertain to healthcare in your state. John Paul II Life Center operates within the state of Texas. Your laws may vary. Also, before you begin either to explore a crisis pregnancy center or a Christ-centered medical practice, get the blessing of your bishop. Get a committed and unified board. If you can, get the cooperation of your local Catholic hospital. Organize and identify physicians who can be key in helping you getting your project off the ground. Develop a strategic plan, and within it include the right professionals, those that you'll need to advise you in all aspects of your endeavor. Familiarize yourself with the fundamentals of fundraising, communication, and education. Everyone involved does not need to know how to do everything, but everyone involved should know about everything that needs to be done. To open a Christ-centered medical practice, understand the financial operations of a clinic. When considering the financial arrangements needed to establish a clinic, it has been our experience that the first-year costs, including salaries, is a minimum of $500,000 and can be supported by a recruitment agreement for a physician with a cooperating hospital. Also, care should be taken to consult with an appropriate practice management company to assist you in setting up the medical clinic and to get the correct assistance with licensing, credentialing for hospital privileges, and third-party contracts, as well as billing and collections with the best electronic medical records and healthcare information technology available. Right now, a national platform is under development to include a service company that will help take advantage of economies of scale so medical clinics and pro-life centers across the United States can be created. For more information, please contact us at Kimberly@jpiilifecenter.org. That's Kimberly at jpiilifecenter.org.